Walsh. I am on the executive member of the NGO Committee on the Family, and I represent Universal Peace Federation, and I am your moderator. I will introduce our executive members, starting with our co-chairs, Marcia Barlow and Vinnie Santoro. Please wave. And Ryan Coe, Professor Ben Freer, is he here? Elizabeth Delgado, all the way in Spain, Rashana Chin, and Dale Gunn Lawton, who is also helping with our tech. So welcome all. Some housekeeping items. This event is being recorded, and the video will be posted in a few days on our website so that you'll have an opportunity to view it and hopefully share it with others. In order to keep the noise to a minimum, please put yourself on mute. In fact, do so now. That helps us. We love your questions. Please post your questions in the chat as you think of them, and we'll get to question and answers after both speakers. Final note, we welcome speakers with a mix of backgrounds and viewpoints in order to foster opportunities for open exploration and discussion about the family, and especially now children's rights. Not all of the views of our speakers necessarily are the same as our executive members. So let's get the show on the road. Of course, the topic is responsible parents, responsible children, celebrating the rights of children. And we organized this in commemoration of the anniversary of UN Convention on the Rights of Children, which is really the major international agreement on childhood. And throughout the convention, there are 33 references to the responsibilities of parents in protecting, educating, and advocating for children. So our two really highly sought after speakers will be focusing on the Convention on the Children's Rights and the role and responsibility of parents in assuring their rights to safety, optimal development, and well-being, so that these sons and daughters can mature into responsible citizens and thriving adults. So again, we are really delighted to have these two speakers. We're lucky. Our first speaker is Rabbi Diana Gerson, who is the executive executive vice president of the New York Board of Rabbis. Her primary focus as a leader of the New York Board of Rabbis has been reaching out across faith communities to confront family violence, domestic violence, sexual abuse, and the exploitation of children. Rabbi Diana Gerson also serves as a member of the Interfaith Alliance for Safer Communities Secretariat. She is known as a passionate champion for human rights with a special focus on children, and she's really a transformational interfaith leader in humanitarian work, again, including and supporting families. Given her background, she is really, and her real passion for the Convention on the Rights of Children and for helping children, she's really an excellent speaker to be talking about how to protect children, and that it takes a community, it takes families, it takes community to protect children, and also how parents are fundamental in that community, and we really should be the first advocate for children. So there's so much more to say about both these speakers. They're amazing. So the little bit more detail of the bios will be sent in the chat. So with that, I have the great honor and pleasure to welcome and give
Unknown caller.
give Rabbi Gerson the floor. You're welcome, Rabbi Gerson.
Firstly, thank you so very much for that very warm introduction. I don't know quite what I did to deserve that. My name is Diana Gerson. I am a Reform rabbi. I was born and raised in New York, in the New York area, was ordained in New York, and I came to work at the New York Board of Rabbis 20 years ago. Through my work at the New York Board of Rabbis, I've had the unique opportunity to serve as our representative at the United Nations. I've actually joined the NGO Committee on the Family, and actually it is a huge part of my doctoral research. I am currently a doctoral student looking at sociology and social policy and how it impacts the family, specifically looking at unaccompanied refugee, migrant, and internally displaced children. So it is of personal interest to me, and I am so pleased and honored to have been included in today's conversation. So thank you so much for having me. I am coming to you from Abu Dhabi, where I am currently preparing for the 6th Global Forum of the Global Network of Religions for Children, which is celebrating its 24th anniversary. We are gathered together in Abu Dhabi. We are expecting 600 community and religious leaders of faith. We are expecting 70 children representing 30 countries and 8 faiths to be with us here, and for the children to be part of the conversation as we look at safety, security, and sustainability. It has been a very long road to Abu Dhabi. Very excited to be here and really looking forward to the conversations that are going to be happening here. But to understand the conversation here, we have to go back in time. And we can go back 35 years, and we could go back to the Convention of the Rights of the Child and its actual adoption at the United Nations. But to understand that that adoption happened after years of consultation. And part of that consultation wasn't just with member states, but it was also done very much with faith leaders and faith communities from across the world, engaging them in the discourse. And actually, you'll notice if you read the CRC or even just the highlight reel, you'll see that the right to freedom of thought, belief, and religion is enshrined in the CRC in Article 14. So very much faith and spirituality are at the center of the conversation. But we can talk firstly about the CRC itself, celebrating its 35th anniversary, and it's a historic achievement in the global recognition of children's rights. As a citizen of the United States, I recognize the fact that children's rights is not necessarily a framework we often use, but the idea of child protection is. And child protection, if anybody can remember the very first case of child abuse that was prosecuted in the United States, anybody know? Probably around sometime in the 1880s. And it was actually prosecuted under abuse of animals, that we didn't really have a context for talking about child protection in the US. And that really shifted dramatically in the 1970s and 80s in the United States. And so our children's rights work and child protection rights work happened in a very interesting moment in time, certainly predating the CRC. But the CRC is more than just a treaty. We think about all kinds of treaties, but it is a living document. So for me, it's kind of like what I would call the Torah. The Torah being the 5 books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy. We are always reading Torah, and we're turning the Torah in order to better understand what God's message is to us as a community. And in the same way, I think we keep looking at the CRC and seeing how we can apply it to the world we live in, whether or not it is the law of our land. We know that the CRC has been ratified in almost every country in the world. The United States is the lone holdout in ratifying the CRC, although we did ratify the two out of the 3 optional protocols, which is interesting, and I'll get to that later. But the reality is it is a living document, and it's a call to action, urging each of us to uphold the dignity and potential of every single child. Adopted in 1989, the CRC has since become the single most widely ratified human rights treaty in history. And as we celebrate this milestone this year, let's take a moment to reflect on the CRC's principles and how they've come alive in both our countries and in our communities. The CRC, adopted in 1989, is the first legally binding international agreement to establish universal rights for children. And it looked at encompassing civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Its comprehensive framework aims to protect children from abuse, exploitation, and violence, and ensures access to education, healthcare, and the right to family life. It actually says that. It's the right to family life. Central to the CRC is the recognition that children deserve protections that honor their developmental needs and their vulnerabilities. So what has it achieved over these 35 years? Let's think about it. Global awareness and legal frameworks. The CRC prompted unprecedented global recognition of children's rights, with nearly almost every country ratifying it, and has driven the development of child-specific legal protections and frameworks worldwide, compelling governments to address issues such as child labor, trafficking, and even juvenile justice. Advancements in healthcare and education have been phenomenal. The CRC has substantially improved children's health and access to education, leading to increased vaccination rates, has helped to reduce infant mortality, and has expanded primary education. Efforts for universal education, including girls' education, have resulted in higher school enrollment and literacy rates over 35 years. It's also increased protections against exploitation and violence. The CRC has supported global campaigns and policies to help reduce child labor, child marriage, and human trafficking. It has promoted international partnerships in accountability and child protection, driving initiatives to end violence against all children. And uniquely, the CRC has sought to uphold children's rights to participate in the decisions that affect them, which has led to the inclusion of children's voices in policymaking and the processes that entails. And the principle has empowered children globally to advocate for their own needs, which I find to be remarkable on two levels. One, earlier this month in Bogota, there was the first ministerial meeting on ending violence against children, bringing together commitments from 100 countries worldwide, with representation from the G7 countries. The United States was there, Canada was there, England was there, and developing nations, looking at how we can work together towards better meeting the needs of children. The second thing to think about in this is, I say this as somebody who's sitting in the United Arab Emirates, which is a very young country compared to some others. But the UAE has a parliament that is a children's parliament, representing children from different parts of the country, Emirati children, and they actually have a say. And when I say a children's parliament, I'm not talking about a separate building. They actually have a seat at the table within their own government, and they are able to participate in their actual decision-making legislative process. It's an incredible idea. It's an incredible achievement. And I think it should help us all look towards what is possible with child engagement. Children should have a say at the table when it comes to what's happening to them. They should be heard. It was once said to me by a colleague that children and all people, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. God created us this way so that we should always listen twice as much as we speak. Children's voices should be heard. And I think that is one of the core parts of the CRC that I think has transformed the way that we engage with children, not just telling them what they need, but asking them what they need in these different moments. But there are also challenges and shortfalls and failures within the CRC. We have to be honest. With any document, its implementation is never quite what we hoped it would be, but continues to push us to strive forward. There have been implementation gaps. We know that even though it's been widely ratified, its implementation is inconsistent. Many countries lack the primary resources or political will to fully integrate CRC principles into local laws, leading to gaps between the CRC's goals and the on-the-ground realities, especially where legal enforcement is weak. And even in places like the United States, which did in fact, when the CRC was adopted at the UN, did vote for it. It just hasn't been ratified by the Senate. But the reality is, when asking local leaders within the United States why it hasn't been ratified, a large part of the conversation has centered around the fact that children's rights and children's well-being and legislation and protections for children are largely held within the states and into local communities, which makes implementing a large-scale treaty such as CRC an almost improbability, that we wouldn't be able to actually fully fulfill it, but rather that it was something that we could use in some ways as a guidepost. So we understand it's imperfect in the implementation. It also has continued violations and exploitation. Despite progress, millions of children worldwide continue to face exploitation. We don't have to look hard to see the statistics and the realities, even as close as our own neighborhoods. It is not unfamiliar to me to hear stories of children who are in my own community being trafficked from Brooklyn to the Bronx. As easy as that. The pipeline of children coming from the state of Ohio to Atlanta, Georgia on a daily basis. That Atlanta, Georgia still ranks one of the top 10 cities in the world for human trafficking. So we have to understand that exploitation, child abuse, child labor, trafficking, especially in conflict zones and marginalized communities, still exists. Child marriage, forced labor, child soldier recruitment remain pressing issues in many parts of the world, even though the CRC exists. There's also still limited access to quality education and healthcare in many parts of the world. While primary education access has improved, challenges remain. What about quality of education? What about inclusivity of education? Disparities in healthcare and education persist. And especially for children in rural areas, impoverished areas, children of what we call here in the UAE, children of determination, but children living with disabilities, also as well as girls, still have many miles to go. And there are challenges in upholding the child's rights to participation. It's just some countries have better opportunities to do this, and there are significant barriers in others. And the world we live in is incredibly difficult right now. We understand that the world is filled with so many conflicts. Look anywhere on the map, conflicts exist. Conflict and poverty and instability obstruct CRC's basic objectives. Children in war-torn areas, economically disadvantaged regions, places that are facing more and more climate change and disparities in access to resources lead to more conflicts that impact children negatively and their families. So we know that CRC has yet to be fully addressed in systemic challenges such as displacement and refugees and safe access to essential services. We still, again, have a ways to go in order to achieve these things. However, the CRC has still been transformative in shaping global perspectives on child rights, has provided a framework that has led to significant improvement in the lives of children, and it falls short, highlighting the need for ongoing collaborative efforts to fulfill its vision. Like I said at the beginning, it's a living and breathing document, and we have to continually work and strive to meet its goals. Addressing underlying challenges that face communities, poverty, conflict, cultural resistance, resource constraints, remains essential to truly uphold the promise of CRC. But take just a moment and reflect on what the world would look like for children without the CRC. Without the CRC, children's lives would not have advanced. Child well-being, access to healthcare, education, children moving forward, moving upward, would be so much slower without the CRC's vision. And the CRC matters in the United States even without its ratification. It helps to shape our policies. It inspires our grassroots action. And we have adopted, as I said, protocols 1 and 2. So we have adopted the articles pertaining to child trafficking and exploitation and child soldiers. We have garnered US support and have offered targeted avenues for change. But I guess what, to me as a rabbi, it speaks most pressingly is that CRC is a moral and policy framework. It's a globally recognized standard for children's rights, embodying our universal values that transcend political boundaries. By referencing the CRC, US advocates can draw on respected international frameworks to guide local policies, framing children's needs as fundamental rights rather than discretionary benefits. It helps to promote awareness and public support, and it leverages the optional protocols for targeted action. We know there is so much we can do on behalf of our children. As I mentioned earlier, Article 14 guarantees children the freedom of thought, belief, and religion. Every child has the right to think and believe what they choose, and also to practice their religion, as long as they are not stopping other people from enjoying their rights. Governments must respect the rights and responsibilities of parents to guide their child as they grow up. In the lead up to the 30th anniversary of the CRC, just 5 years ago, Arigato International convened alongside of UNICEF and the UN Secretary General Special Representative on Ending Violence Against Children, at the time, Marta Santos Pais of Portugal, convened a study on faith and children's rights, a multi-religious study on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And what we learned, as I was part of the writing team doing the research for the Jewish faith, is that, in fact, no matter who we asked, what religion we explored, what organization we worked with, we understood for the very first time how the CRC highlights the significant role played by religious communities in advancing the rights and well-being of children over the past 30 years. Most importantly, the study itself sought to identify the common values shared by the different faiths and how they intertwined with the principles of the CRC. It continues to promote continued action by faith communities to implement this international treaty. Faith traditions worldwide are committed to protecting and uplifting vulnerable communities. There's no question, and particularly the lives of children. Viewed through a faith lens, the CRC aligns with deeply held beliefs about the value and the dignity of each and every child, making faith communities natural allies in advocating for children's rights. Faith communities bring profound moral clarity to the public discourse on children's rights. Standing for justice and compassion inspires others to honor children's dignity, resist exploitation, and advocate for safe and nurturing environments. And I certainly believe that children best belong in families. While parents are their children's first advocates, they often need help and support, and faith-based organizations provide that mentorship, resource, and safe spaces for families, reinforcing the belief that every child deserves care, opportunity, and love. In difficult times, these communities step in, offering counseling, community programs, and family support systems and services that help families find stability and strength. In areas affected by conflict, poverty, or natural disaster, faith-based organizations provide immediate relief and psychological and spiritual support, helping to rebuild communities and foster environments that prioritize children's well-being. By creating networks of support, faith communities are essential partners in advancing the CRC principles. As we celebrate the 35th anniversary of the CRC this year, I urge each of us to recognize that protecting children's rights is both a very personal and a deeply collective duty. It's not only the role of parents, nor is it the sole responsibility of families. It is the work of every individual, every organization, every faith community, every nation. The CRC gives us a roadmap, but it's our actions that bring its principles to life. Let us commit ourselves to the vision of a world where every child is cherished, protected, empowered to reach their fullest potential. In closing, our commitment to children's rights is not just a promise. It is a legacy that we build together with parents as children's first advocates, communities as their champions, and family communities as steadfast supporters. We can and we must make this vision a reality for every child. I thank you for this opportunity to share my perspective, and I look forward to the dialogue ahead. And I really can't wait to hear from Katie Faust and her insights. I've been going through your website, and I look forward to reading your book and to our continued work in this vital cause. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Gerson. I have learned so much. Boy, you are passionate and certainly know so much about the CRC. Boy, several highlights. I love that you emphasize the freedom, children's rights to freedom, thought, and belief, that's in there. And that, again, the important role that faith-based organizations, find a common commitment to children, and faith-based organizations are very important in changing the lives and supporting children. I also love that you emphasize that in the CRC is the children's right to family life and how important family life is. One question, I think my family therapy background is coming up. It's important to give children a voice. There's more effort at the UN for youth to speak up. And I think partly families or parents are realizing, we think of, a century back or more, that children didn't have much voice, but parents need to be listening better to children in the family. But parents are still parents. So there's kind of a, dichotomy of giving children the right to voice their opinions and grow by learning to share their opinions, but yet the parental role is still important. So there's a little bit of a tension of giving children's all the rights, and is that a tension? Am I making sense in the world today?
You're making sense. And it's a common conversation I have, primarily in the United States, because we don't have this children's rights language in a clear way. We talk about children's well-being. The courts always decide things in the best interest of the child, but really that's according to any particular judge. There's very little standard for what is in the best interest of a child. It's very almost subjective. You've got law guardians and guardians ad litem, and you've got parents and judges and lawyers, and it's hard because you have to also keep in mind a child's developmental capacities at any given age. So you have to look at it within the context of Piaget's theory on child development is on one side. So a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 12-year-old are going to have very different perspectives. Does it mean that they shouldn't be asked and included in the discussion? And then you can also look at Faulkner's developmental scale on spiritual development as well. And it actually very nicely tucks in with Piaget. And I think there's a lot of value there. In religious life, we take on a lot of different roles within our communities as we grow up. I can say from my perspective as a rabbi, I know that we have a child who, when they are born, they are brought into the covenant. I know that when a child is 2, they are taught the Shema. They start their formal Jewish education when they're 5. At this age of 13, when they hit the age of maturity, they have their bar or bat mitzvah. And it doesn't, we say at bar mitzvah, it's like, okay, you're an adult, you're 13. Does it mean that we say you have to leave the house and you have to go, live somewhere else? No. But it does mean that the child has certain responsibilities to the community at that age. At 13, you count for a minyan, so for a quorum to pray. So if you're a boy and you're in a traditional community, that means you need 10 men of the age of 13 in order to pray, you're acting as an adult. You're taking on certain communal responsibilities. And I think that there's a way of doing this at different ways, at different stages of a child's life. When I ask a child at the age of 2, what do they want for dinner? I don't say, what do you want for dinner? I say, do you want chicken or you want beef? Like, they're not getting to decide the menu. At the same time, we give them choice. I think that there is an appropriate way to have decision-making and having that participation not be tokenized and not be transactional, but rather to be transformational. I think that needs to be our goal. And that we, by treating children with their, inherent dignity as children of God, made in the divine creator's image, that we have that responsibility to have them included. It doesn't mean that they did make all the decisions. We're still the parents, we're still the adults, but I do believe that they should have more of a voice at the table than they're often given. It makes them part of the solutions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. You're such a wealth of information, thoughtfulness, and moral passion. And I know questions are flooding in. So be aware, you're going to have lots of questions. There's much interest in what you have said. Thank you so much, Rabbi Gerson.
Thank you.
Okay. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Katie Faust, who is the founder and president of Them Before Us, which is a global movement defending children's rights to their mother and father. She publishes, speaks, testifies widely. I have to say almost constantly, because hearing something about her schedule is like crazy. We're really lucky to have her. So anyway, she speaks widely and on why marriage and family matters are matters of justice for children. She's spoken, I believe, several times at the UN. I've heard her speak on children's rights. She's on the advisory board of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. Katie is the author of Pro-Child Politics, Why Every Cultural, Economic, and National Issue is a Matter of Justice for Children. So with this great expertise and wealth of information, it's really most fitting, Katie, that you're speaking for us today on this topic. So I welcome you and I give you the floor.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to speak to you because you are the perfect hybrid of our work that looks at all of marriage and family issues, not necessarily through the lens of it being the building block of society or a religious institution, but really as the primary defense of a fundamental child right that is mentioned 4 to 5 times in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And while Rabbi Gerson's exactly right, this is not necessarily a document that we are as familiar with in the United States. The fact that 192 countries have ratified it, have worked it into their corpus of law, speaks and testifies to the fact that this is a universal right. And so that's what I'm going to be talking with you about. I'm going to talk with you about the power of defending this fundamental right of children, the right to both parents, which in Article 21, when speaking about adoption, says what it is we all understand both parents to be. That is their biological parents. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about it as a woman who is an advocate on behalf of children. And I also want to say I'm going to talk about it as an adoptive mother and the understanding that adoption is an institution centered around the well-being of children and that it can be a stopgap, a safeguard. In fact, I would say it is a just society's response to children who have lost their parents. So we understand that a child's right to their own biological mother and father is not necessarily something that can be unbroken in all situations, but it is the presumption. And it's the presumption for good reason. So unlike the good rabbi who is going to give you 20 flawless minutes of a conversation on the UNCRC, I'm going to share some notes with you just because some of our work is somewhat new. The concept is something you're familiar with, but we're going to be looking at it in a different way. So I'm going to share my screen with you. We're going to go through a few points, some of what we present at Them Before Us regularly. And I understand that this may generate some questions, and I want all of them I especially have an answer to the question on whether or not there's a conflict between children's rights and parents' rights. And the answer is, when you properly identify rights, there's not only no conflict, they perfectly reinforce one another. So the conversation today, let me reduce my screen here. Oops. The conversation today is talking about responsible parents producing responsible children. And our argument at Them Before Us is that responsible parenthood primarily begins with protecting children's primary right on this side of the womb, and that is their right to both mother and father. And I want to talk with you about the power of this right. And I'm going to boil that down into 3 different explanations. There is power in protecting children's rights to both parents, and it is indeed the greatest factor in producing responsible children who are able to self-manage, ground themselves, and grant children the stability they need, deserve, and crave when it comes to developing a full-fledged, healthy, self-sufficient identity. So there's 3 different reasons why this fundamental, brilliant right that was outlined in the UNCRC is so critical to children. If we can defend children's fundamental right to both their mother and father, we get 3 things. We get children who are statistically the most likely to be safe and loved. We get children who are granted access to their biological identity, and we maximize child development. So first of all, I want to talk about children being safe and loved. We have been studying family structure for decades, and all of us desperately want children to be safe and loved. But we don't need to guess at the factors that would maximize the possibility that children will be safe and loved. There is something about a child being raised by both parents, as it expresses in the UNCRC, that allows children to have this level of thriving. What we have seen over the last couple decades of research is that a child's own mother and father, the 2 people responsible for their existence, are the most connected to, invested in, and protective of kids. And we can look at this by examining the children who grew up in homes that did not necessarily include one or both of their biological parents. So, for example, a portrait of step families by Pew Research a couple of years ago, about a decade ago, examined that both in terms of step parents toward their stepchildren and stepchildren toward their step parents, there was lower levels of connection, lower levels of obligation. In fact, another study found that children in 50% of cases didn't even claim a step parent as one of their parents. And then when that marriage broke up, 50% of those kids, down to 25%, continued to claim the step parent as their own. So what we see is there is a larger degree of disconnect between both parent and child when the parent is not biologically related. We also see lower levels of investment in parents that are raising children that are not biologically theirs. There was a massive study that was done, published in the Journal of Health Economics back in 2001, that found that unrelated women who were raising both a biological child and an unrelated child, usually a stepchild, that those stepchildren received less medical care. Their seatbelts were buckled less often. They, on average, received 1 year less of a college education, and 5% less money was spent on their food. There are lower levels of investment, whether it's time, energy, attention, or resources on unrelated children. And the child's own mother and father leverages the highest amount of investment in kids. And certainly the one that we are all extremely concerned with, the one that the rabbi spoke about rightly at length, and that is situations of child exploitation and abuse. And we do see horrifying examples of children who are raised by their own married biological mother and father who experience abuse, sexual, emotional, physical. But when we compare various family structures, what we see is any step away from a child being raised in the permanent union of their own mother and father drastically increases the risk of child abuse and maltreatment. And so what we found is that if we do want children to be safe and loved, it is critically important that we adhere to and respect the UNCRC's explicit recognition that a child has a right to both parents. And especially when it comes to being safe and loved, that is one of the greatest ways that we can advance child thriving. So if we believe that children deserve to be safe and loved, responsible parents will protect children's rights in the family. There's another critical area that this recognition of a child's right to both parents, to both biological parents, grants children, and it is the critical access to their biological identity. It is very hard for children to answer the question, who am I? If they can't answer the question, whose am I? And again, I say this as an adoptive mom who is raising a son who does not know his biological parents, because the processes that and the country that we adopted from actually criminalizes child relinquishment. And therefore, the biological parents are very careful to leave no trace and no information about them. What that means is my son has questions that I can't answer. There are things for which he has lost that my husband and I cannot fully compensate, things that he deserves and craves and has a hunger to know. We actually understand the importance of biological identity and access to a child's biological identity by discovering and asking the populations of children who grew up without it. So we now have a couple decades of experience of children who were created through sperm donation. Now we've got a few more children that are old enough to speak for themselves who were created through egg donation. And of course, we have decades of information on children who were adopted. And overwhelmingly, what we see is these kids care about the identity and, whenever possible, relationship with the two people responsible for their existence. We Are Donor Conceived is a group of donor-conceived adults who take surveys of their members regularly. And their 2017 study found that 81% of donor-conceived adults often wonder what personality traits, skills, or physical similarities they share with their donors. Many of these children grew up with a mother and father, but they were an unrelated adult. They were separated from one adult, one of both of their parents, and it very often will plunge them into identity struggles. The American Adoption Congress survey found that 65% of adoptees desire to meet their birth parents, and 94% expressed the desire to know which birth parent they resemble most. Now, this is interesting because adoptive parents on average are wealthier, better educated, and statistically completely buck the trend in terms of investment in children. They tend to spend more time with their kids than the average biological parent. And yet those resources, that level of education, and even that increased connection does not answer all the questions that adoptees have about their origins. Another study, the largest study that we have on children created through sperm donation specifically, report that 64% of donor-conceived adults agree, my sperm donor is half of who I am. And almost 80% would say being donor-conceived is a significant part of their identity. This access to biological identity is one of the primary reasons why in the United States, we have moved almost completely away from closed adoption. Back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, when domestic adoption of infants was at its height, the default was closed adoption. Oftentimes, adoption agencies would advise parents, you don't even need to tell your child that they're adopted. It is not going to matter at all. But what we discovered is it's not even that it doesn't matter, it's that it hyper matters. And that actually caused a dramatic reform of adoption throughout the United States, to the point where now in the United States, 95% of domestic adoptions are open. They have some degree of connection, knowledge, or relationship with the child's first family, because social workers and adoptees themselves, right? Because we're talking about including children in the conversation. The children themselves said, this matters to me. Even if the child cannot be raised by their biological mother and father, having access to their first family, as it is explicitly recommended in the UNCRC, that when possible, you have unification if a child loses their mother and father, and when it's not possible, that they still have access whenever possible, whenever it's safe and in the best interest of the child, because there is something that only those two adults can grant children, and it is their biological identity. So if we want children to form stable identities, responsible parents will protect children's rights in the family. The third reason why access to both parents, the care and love of both parents, the raising and the upbringing of both parents is so critical to children, is because if you can protect children's right to both parents, you automatically grant children the perfect gender balance in the home. Children do not just need love, caregivers, or family in the abstract. They benefit specifically from a male parent and a female parent. Gender is not a social construct. The beautiful differences expressed in male and female is hardwired into our bodies and into our brains. And nowhere are those differences displayed more powerfully and more critically than in the theater of the home. And it strikes me that there is such an effort globally and rightly to ensure some level of gender parity or gender representation within our major institutions, whether they be parliamentary or on publicly held boards of large corporations. And yet we have unfortunately diminished the importance of both mother and father in the staging ground of child development. And that is actually does a great disservice to children. That is because men and women are different, and that means that mothers and fathers offer distinct and complementary benefits to kids. So again, this is not a mystery. We have been studying mothering and fathering, and many sociologists would say there's actually no such thing as parenting. There's only mothering and there's fathering. Men don't mother, women don't father, and kids need both. Now, obviously, I'm going to be speaking in some generalities, and every marriage and every mother and father will in some way deviate from these norms that I'm going to be communicating. But these norms exist because they are largely true. Because why? Women tend to have higher levels of oxytocin, men tend to have higher levels of vasopressin, women tend to be not as strong or physical or forceful, men tend to be more aggressive and competitive. And those differences, those innate, beautiful, glorious, critical differences benefit children on the developmental level. So moms tend to care for kids, right? They tend to be the one that is ensuring that the kids eat the vegetables and they go to bed on time. Personally, as a mother, half of my life is pretty much registering my children for different events. Like all I do is complete registrations for them because I want to care for them. I am there to ensure that all of the boxes are checked. And especially when children are young, that care for children is expressed in the confined spaces of the home, where there is maximized nurturing and emotional connection. Now, that default of moms to nurture and connect with their children in those confined spaces actually develops children's fine motor skills. It is with mom that they begin cutting, coloring, tying their shoes. Maybe while she's chopping vegetables for the soup, they're slicing banana with a butter knife. All of the interactions with mom naturally hone a child's fine motor skills. Dads don't do as much caring for kids, even though today's father, on average, cares for children an hour and a half more than men 20 years ago did. So right now, we do actually have 4 men that are connected to their child's mother through marriage. We're actually getting higher levels of dad involvement, which is wonderful. But dads interact with children differently. They don't tend to nurture and care for children as much. They play with kids. And this is critical. Dads don't do as much fine motor skill development. It is the running, the jumping, the climbing, primarily the wrestling with kids that helps children develop their gross motor skills, using their bodies, understanding the maximum and the limits to what they can produce. And that is especially true for young boys. When there is an absence of either mother or father, we are developmentally disadvantaging children. Another way that both mothers and fathers maximize child development is women naturally tend to simplify their language right down to the child's level. Like the 3-year-old comes in, has a scrape on their knee, and mom says, "Oh, baby, baby, get an owie, baby, get a boo-boo. Oh, come here, let me give you a kissy kiss." The dad sees the scraped knee and says, "Dude, that is a gnarly rug rash. Were you doing like burning out cookies on the big wheel in the cul-de-sac?" Men talk to children like they talk to everyone else. So when you defend children's rights to both parents, the child automatically has one parent that understands, the child understands everything they're saying. And they have one parent that is constantly pushing them towards cognitive expansion when it comes to their verbal development. I'll also say that there is something more intangible about both a male and female parent. And that is that children don't just benefit from maternal and paternal love. They crave maternal and paternal love. One of the things that we do at Them Before Us is we catalog the stories of children who have lost their mother or father. And we ask them to share some of the struggles that they experienced as a result. And some of that includes what we call mother hunger and father hunger. When children grow up with a loving, wonderful mother, or even two loving, wonderful mothers, they very often still hunger for a father. There is something innate in a child that longs to be loved by both a man and a woman. Maggie shared her story on our website, and she was raised by a single mother by choice who was wealthy. The child was very chosen. There was maximum investment by the mother. But Maggie says, "The absence of my father in my life has led to so many awful things. I felt unloved, unworthy, abandoned. I craved a father figure and protection. This led me to seek out unhealthy and abusive relationships with men." Now, this is unfortunately very common, that children who grew up without a father, for example, they crave paternal love in such a degree that many of them will find a man to love them. It just won't be a man that has the same level of connection, investment, and protection that their own biological father would have had for them. And that is why we see much higher rates of teen pregnancy in fatherless girls and much higher levels of criminality in fatherless boys. In fact, a study a couple years ago found that boys who grew up without a father were on average more likely to go to prison than college. That is because those boys found a man to love them. But it was a man who said, "I will love you for the weekend if you run drugs for me." It is critical that we fill a child's tank for both maternal and paternal love. Samantha was raised without a mother. She was raised by her father and his partner. And she talks about how she was so well loved by her two gay dads. She didn't even know there was such a thing as a mother until in kindergarten, she watched a movie called The Land Before Time, where a little dinosaur is looking for his mother. And it suddenly made her realize that there was this thing called mother, and it was a woman who was your parent. And she said, "I certainly started to crave the love of a mother." And she worked to fill that hole with her dad's lesbian friends, her teachers, anyone that would show her any level of female affection, because her two fathers' love could not fill her need for maternal love. So if we want maximized child development, if we want children to developmentally flourish, responsible parents are going to protect children's rights in the family. Now, what I'm saying is very challenging, because I think all of us understand that there is a lot of adult self-interest when it comes to family formation and when it comes to keeping families together for the long haul. And at Them Before Us, we recognize that there is all kinds of adult longing, loss, pain, struggle, and desire when it comes to forming and building your family. Our message is simply this: children have a right to both parents. explicitly states in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. When they are needlessly denied both parents or one parent, it impacts their safety, the investment, their identity formation. And so however adults are struggling, whatever kind of longings and losses they're experiencing, no amount of adult desire justifies violating children's rights to both their mother and father. This worldview of putting them before us, of elevating children's rights above what adults want, will require adults do hard things on behalf of children. But that is the only way this goes, because the only alternative is for children to do hard things on behalf of adults. And that is probably the best definition of injustice that you can define. True justice is the strong sacrificing for the weak. And unfortunately, in many matters of marriage and family, we have done the exact opposite. We have forced the weak, children, to sacrifice for the sake of the strong. So my charge to you is to return to the fundamental principles that are outlined in a variety of different articles of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, and encourage responsible parents to primarily recognize and protect this fundamental child right that kicks off the entire UNCRC, because it is upon this fundamental right on which we build all the other rights. Thank you.
You're muted, Lynn.
That little point I forgot. Thank you very much, Katie. You really make your arguments very clear, very well supported by a lot of good research. Mothers and fathers do parent differently, and it makes a big difference to children. And you really articulate it in terms of what children fundamentally need. I really appreciate what you're saying. I personally can relate, and I will share. I too am an adoptive mother. And my husband and I are very fortunate to adopt two boys. We love them endlessly to no end. I get emotional just saying that. They both have done very well. One went to graduate school at the University of Chicago. The other got a PhD in astrophysics. He's working for I don't know quite, it's a secret what he's doing. So and they're both married, so they've really done well. And we've had a fairly open relationship with the biological families, but not a whole lot of contact because they're not nearby. But several years ago, my oldest son was able to spend some time with his biological mother. And he came back and he said, "Mom, now I know why I am the way I am." And it just struck me. My son has this longing and this hole in him, not knowing why he is the way, who is he? And it just, it's very painful that he has this loss.
Lynn, let me just speak to
Sure,
that
go ahead.
and say, like I said, a child's right to their mother and father is not absolute. There are times where they cannot or should not be raised by their biological mother or father. And in that sense, what we talk about at Them Before Us is that adoption seeks to mend the wound, but we don't pretend like there's no wound. There is a wound. There is a loss. Adoption begins with loss. And adoption, as it's properly understood, as a child-centric institution, which unfortunately right now, sometimes we're getting adoption wrong and thinking that it is for adults. It's not. It is always for children. It always must be centered on the best interest of the child. So when adoption is properly understood, it is a just society's effort to mend that wound. But we have to be very clear. There's a wound. And sometimes adoption cannot fully compensate for everything the child has lost. A lot of times what we have found at Them Before Us is we invite and we catalog the stories of children who have experienced mother or father loss. Oftentimes, many children don't have the perspective or the freedom to process the kind of impact that the family breakdown inflicted on them until, I would say, at the earliest, until they're 10 years out of the home or forming their own families themselves. And so it's very important for us to protect this fundamental right, because children have a hard time, A, defending it themselves, and B, articulating its importance, oftentimes until they're adults themselves. And so we, at Them Before Us, because we are grounded on children's fundamental right to their mother and father, we make the case for that critical importance because of love and safety, biological identity, and maximizing child development. But we also understand that sometimes the ideal isn't possible. And in that sense, adults do hard things by grafting those children into their families.
Very well articulated. Thank you. I guess, so coming from knowing, the heartache for children and knowing that there's many people with this, but yet they come in different situations like divorce, same-sex marriage, infertility, even considering like the egg donor, sperm donor, surrogacy. But recognizing first the rights and well-being of children, as we should and must, how do we navigate communicating and teaching this ideal and advocate for children first in public policy, without bringing the charges and coming across as being hateful or unloving or accepting of other people's situations? So,
Well,
answer
that is something that we have wrestled with quite a bit at Them Before Us. But again, there is not a situation in some of these where nobody's going to do the hard thing. We must recognize that children come from a man and woman. They get their biological identity from that man and woman. For whatever reason, whether it's evolutionary advantages or the fallen sin nature of man, a child's own biological parents advantage children in ways that unrelated adults do not. That children's development is maximized when they're raised by the two people responsible for their existence. These are unbending child realities. The pronouncement of 5 Supreme Court justices do not change it. Simply repeating love makes a family will not change it. We either recognize the fundamental realities of the child as validated by both the UNCRC, natural law, and decades of social science research, and the testimonies of children themselves. We either recognize these fundamental child realities or we victimize children. Those are the only 2 options, because children have not changed and they will not change. Children in Syria need the same thing that children in Savannah need. So these are universal child rights, which is why it makes sense that the UNCRC is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in the world. So the truth is, we simply need courage. We need the courage to say, we will advance the rights and well-being of children, regardless of what name you call me. And here's the thing about defending children's rights in the family. You will piss everyone off. If you're doing this right, what you are saying is every adult, single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile, must conform to the rights of children. No adult gets a pass in the world of child defense. Every adult, regardless of their longing or loss or desires, no adult gets permission to say, the kid is going to sacrifice for me. In a just society, one that honors the UNCRC, it is always going to be adults saying, I will sacrifice for the kid. And at some point, every adult is probably going to have to make that decision. At some point, we are going to have to say, my marriage is struggling. I would like an easy exit. But if I leave my husband, my children are going to live in split homes, have split lives, and according to one study, develop split personalities in 50% of cases. 50% of the time, children of divorce become a different person on the drive from dad's house to mom's house. Divorce impacts children's physical, mental, emotional, academic, and relational health. At some point, every adult parent is going to have to, except in cases of abuse, adultery, addiction, which 70% of divorces today break up low conflict marriages. They are not cases of fault. At some point, the adults are going to say, I have to do the hard thing because the only alternative is asking my 3 children to do the hard thing for the rest of their life. It is the same thing with people struggling with infertility, which is a crushing burden. Infertility is one of the hardest things that you're going to face as an adult. But if the solution to infertility is cutting children off from one or both of their biological parents, that is where you have to say, no, I'm not going to force the kid to sacrifice for me. I will find a way to resolve my longing for children in ways that don't violate and victimize children's rights. So if you're doing this right, you're not just going to make the gays mad, you will make everyone mad. And that is what child defense requires.
Beautiful. It's just clear. What's the right thing to do if we put children's well-being first?
And let me just say, when I say the gays, I say that because unfortunately, for some people that believe in marriage and family, that was the only place they were willing to get in and engage, without recognizing that it is heterosexuals who are responsible for victimizing many, many more numbers of children than same-sex parents have or will in the future. And so I say that a little tongue-in-cheek, so forgive me if that came across as callous.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Boy, this is powerful. I know there's so many questions from people, and I have asked Marcia Barlow to kind of manage the questions. And I should do my duty and check.
Look at the direct message, Lynn. I've been putting the questions directly to you.
Okay, all right.
Lynn, I
Marcia,
don't know if you
anyone-
saw, we had a hand up also from one of the attendees. I don't know if you want to call on that.
Okay. Marcia, do you want to just call out the first question while I bumble around my tech? Read the first question you think we
Alright,
should
Let
answer.
me go up to that.
Sorry. Oh, I think I know the problem.
We had a question about, is the CRC neutral on the topic of abortion? But I think that was answered in the chat. If you want to take a look at that response, it's in from Susan Rylance. And now I'm struggling to get back to where I was at for you, Lynn. So I'm not sure I'm all that. What is an example of something children might request that could or would not have been recognized by their parents, and the help of parents to achieve the goals? Does this encourage the direction and guidance of parents as recognized in Article 5 of the CRC? That's a question, and I don't know whether the rabbi would like to take that, or Katie, Rabbi, do you have a response to that? I'll read it again. It was in the chat. It's from Susan Rylance. What is an example of something children might request that could or would not have been recognized by their parents, and need the help of parents to achieve that goal? Does this encourage the direction and guidance of parents as recognized in Article 5 of the CRC? So
I think this was in response to Diana's presentation.
okay, Diana is.
So I'm happy to look at that. I mean, if you're going to look at Article 5, let's just take a very quick summary view of it. Article 5 is parental guidance and a child's evolving capacities. Governments must respect the rights and responsibilities of parents and carers to provide guidance and direction to their child as they grow up, so that they fully enjoy their rights. This must be done in a way that recognizes the child's increasing capacity to make their own choices. And I say that the summary is not mine, it comes from UNICEF. So to understand, there are examples of times children have issues that come up that perhaps their parent, it's outside the scope of what their parents know, they understand. And it often comes as children grow into a space where they are leaving the family system, right? When you turn 7, 8, 9 years old, developmentally, children are starting to develop relationships that are outside their home, right? They're going to school, they're meeting people in different spaces, they're talking to teachers, classmates, friends, that are not necessarily people that they know from their inner circle of trust. There are things that come up that children don't want to share with their parents. There are things they don't know how to share with their parents. My area of expertise is truly in the area of child abuse and neglect, exploitation, sexual assault, molestation. What we know is that children, when something bad is happening to them, they tend not to talk to their parents first. And the reason they tend not to talk to their parents first is they don't want to disappoint their parents. There is a fear, especially if it's coming within that circle of trust. They don't want to disappoint their parent. They don't want to tattle. They don't want to cause instability. There's so many things that children feel and internalize because they recognize the situation around them. If their home is a volatile place, if there's instability already, they're not going to want to unsettle the boat even more. So sometimes when the child discloses, they tell a friend. That friend may tell their parent. They may go and tell a teacher. They may tell their pastor, their rabbi. They're going to go to a trusted adult, but they may not go to their parent first. And what I always teach is that when a child discloses, we always say to a child that I'm your mommy, I'm your daddy, I am your parent. My job is, and my responsibility is to you, to that child. And you let me worry about the rest, but I'm here for you and I believe you and I'm going to help take care of you and I'm going to make sure that we get help. And I think that's a very extreme example of something that is very basic in children's lives. Children are deeply aware of their situations. I grew up in a home with domestic violence, so I understand that kind of from the inside out. You know, my parents would tell you, oh, we never fought in front of the children. Let me tell you, every child knows exactly what's happening in the house. We know. There's no fighting that happens in a space that nobody hears. I could tell you what they fought about. I could tell you the details that they fought about. And I could tell you I was sitting at the top of the stairs listening to every argument. So I think that there is a huge piece of this that is what children try to do because they try to protect their families. They deeply, deeply want to protect their families. So there are always times where a child will go outside the family system, and yet we have to empower children to come to their parents and to find solutions. So I hope that helps a little bit with the understanding from my perspective. Katie, I can't wait to hear your perspective, only because I can't believe we haven't crossed paths before. And I'm so excited about what you're working on and that I'm like, I want to not only read the book, but read all of the research you have and maybe have coffee.
Well, and I would say that a lot of this is solved by a proper understanding of rights. Unfortunately, anything that anybody really, really wants is conveniently framed as a right because they believe that it gives them more power in their argument. But when you're looking at natural law, you know, which is the basis on which, for example, the United States Constitution was founded, natural law is a system of philosophy that discovers a universal morality based on looking at the natural world. It is not dependent on revelation, even though I want all the revelation. Like I am married to a Baptist Navy chaplain. So give me the Bible all day, all the time. But when you're making a case for public policy, I feel like natural law, social stories of kids, because we want to include their voices in the conversation. That actually should be the lead. But that also involves properly understanding what rights are. And an adult who really, really wants something doesn't mean they have a right to it. Very similarly, a child who wants something does not mean they have a right to it. That we have to properly identify rights. I put a link in the chat for our first book, Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. And we spend some time in chapter 1 discussing what are natural rights. How do you know when something is a natural right? And it is those foundational natural rights that we shouldn't just protect, we should protect at all costs. But unfortunately, a lot of what things that people say today might be something that's important and might be something you even need to survive, but that does not make it a fundamental natural right. So I think that a lot of this has to do with properly understanding rights. Being a children's rights advocate does not mean that children get everything they want. Very often it means saying no to something that a child wants, if it's something that is going to harm them. And of course, the rabbi is exactly right, that this is going to unfold as the child develops and has an increasing understanding and awareness and ability to calibrate themselves in the world. And certainly it is dependent on the full development of the prefrontal cortex, where they're able to think through the consequences of their action and behavior. Until that point, you parents are the child's prefrontal cortex. That is why I think, as the rabbi stated, it is so important to maximize our emotional connection with children so they do feel like they can come to us first with questions, problems, struggles, because they need to have the adults who are the most connected to, invested in, and protective of them, helping them think through the consequences of their behavior. So there's a lot that parents can do today to both understand the best interest of the child as they grow and develop, but then also maximize our connection with them so that we can be the safe place where they land and with whom they process.
Thank you, Rabbi and Katie, for both of your responses. There's one common kind of refraining the questions that is expressing concern that the language best interests of the child can be used in a way that diminishes parental rights in some very dramatic ways. So what is your feeling on that phrase, best interests of the child, and how it can be used in positive ways? And it appears a concern that it can be used negatively as well. So Rabbi, if you want to go first with that.
Sure. When we talk about the best interest of the child, I think we are talking about something that has had ebbs and flows within the legal frameworks of the United States. And it is very, very particular from state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And while there is ample case law, it doesn't mean that it's an absolute. If you ask any family court or criminal court I can give you the New York example because it's close to home, that in the 1980s, when all the child protection services propped up across the city and the state, they were better known as the baby snatchers. That they came in and the first thing that they did was they removed the child. It was the very first thing they did. There was a report of abuse. I'm going to remove the child from the home in order to investigate. And that child returning home, reunification, was a long, arduous, horrifying experience for families. What goes to that point further is the reluctance of good people, good citizens, from actually making reports in cases where they had reasonable suspicion that a child was being abused. So they automatically, oh, I don't want to get involved. I don't know what to do. I want to make an anonymous call. I want to go around the corner. I want to go to the next town before I call. And I used to get those phone calls all the time. Rabbi, I found abuse. What do I do? I'm going to go to a different neighborhood, a different precinct, and make the call. And because I don't want to give my name, because there's an impression that two things are going to happen. One, Child Protective Services is going to show up on someone's step and say, Rabbi Gerson called us and said that you're abusing your child. And two, they're going to now take that child from that family. By and large, in the United States today, children are not removed from the home. A call is made to Child Protective Services. They come out to investigate. The child, 9 times out of 10, remains at home. But there is a lot of fear that is now part of our DNA as a society. We are reluctant, we are fearful. And when we hear in the best interest of the child, it goes right back to that early trauma of what happened, even though in today's world, it is often not the case, most often not the case. So there has to be some level of re-education, of resetting our natural compass to understanding the services that are being provided. Because as a society, we want to do right by a child. If a child comes to us and there is a problem, we want to help that child in the best way that we can. And calling Child Protective Services or engaging legal services of some way is saying to a child, I believe you and I'm going to advocate for you and I'm going to put your needs in front of my needs, right? It is not easy. It is hard. That first time you make that phone call, it is the feeling in the pit of your stomach is the worst. But I also know when I've made the call and something was unfounded, and I know that I did right because that family got help. And I also know that when it was founded, that child was out of harm's way and in safety with their family intact. So in the best interest of the child, there is the impression, there is the reality, there is the very large distance in between. And we need to do better as a society to make sure that we have better understanding of what measures are actually out there.
Mm-hmm. I will add that, so this is exactly right, that we really have seen a shift in child protective services and the way that they intervene. And I would say that in some cases, we are going the opposite direction. Sometimes children are being left in homes that have demonstrably been a risk to children and for ideological reasons. Child Protective Services refusing to remove the child. And that is where I think the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is a very helpful tool, because it is very important to clearly identify the fundamental pre-political rights that both children and parents have. And like I said earlier, that I alluded to, when you properly defined children's rights and parental rights, they are not in conflict. They perfectly reinforce one another. And you can Google, do parents' rights conflict with children's rights? I did a video about this on the Colson Center's website, so you can find that if you want a little more explanation. But we do need to firmly understand that children have a fundamental right to their parents. Not just parents have a right to their children, which they do, but children have a right to their own parents. And I actually understand the question and the motivation of the questioner, because unfortunately, in a couple different countries, we have seen children removed from parents because of ideological reasons, not because of issues of child abuse, but because the state system has been weaponized against parents because they feel like the parent is following an ideological path that is going to harm the child. And so those fears are founded, maybe not widespread at this point, but all the more reason for us to clearly identify what actually is a right and what a child wants is not necessarily a right, but the fundamental pre-political rights, especially within the family. And if we did that well, we actually would then be able to contextualize the best interest of the child, which means massive forces that would have to override the very clear bond and relationship that parents and child have to one another. And then only in extreme cases of genuine abuse would the state intervene.
Thank you. Lynn,
Marcia,
you go ahead, Lynn.
well, I apologize. For some reason, I can't get my chat, so you're doing beautifully. It's 2:46. I know we started late, so can we do one or two more questions and then have the speakers give a final last minute summary? Is that workable?
At the same time. All right. There's two questions that were outstanding in that we haven't addressed. Does the CRC address the abortion issue? And then what about in the research on same-sex parenting, that there is no difference between heterosexual parenting and same-sex parenting, and how do you, there's a gap there.
Yeah.
How do you address
If the rabbi wants to take the abortion question, I'm sure she's much more better positioned to speak to that than I am.
Well, actually, it was addressed in the chat as well. So if you look, we generally affirm across the faith communities that the CRC is neutral on abortion. And it's all about how you read the text, I would say, like any good treaty, it's what you read into it. But if you look at the preamble in Article 9, it does talk about the protection both before and after birth. So you can take that as you will, as how you choose to interpret what that means. But I think it is clear that it is understanding that from the time of conception towards birth, that we have a certain, as parents, as impending parents, however you choose to frame it, that we have a responsibility to making sure that mother has access to health care and what she needs so that she has a healthy birth, a healthy pregnancy. And I think that is what the CRC is telling us, that is our collective responsibility. And so when we talk about children's rights in particular, I think it is very important that we understand that a healthy birth and a healthy child in the first 2 years of a child's life begins from the time of conception. That mother has to have access to healthcare, well-being, food, and opportunity. If you don't have those basic things, exposure to drugs, all the things that impede a healthy pregnancy, and let alone the actual complications that many women face, that we need to make sure that those things are in place, because a child would be born with deficits. Malnutrition during pregnancy leads to malnutrition at birth. It leads to defects in the brain capacities, in the physical capacities. The child is starting from a much more difficult place. So when I think about what our responsibilities are to children, to make sure their well-being, that we give them every advantage, means that we have to make sure that we are supporting women and families from the beginning. If we are not actually dedicating ourselves to that reality, then are we really talking about children's rights? I deeply, deeply believe that if we put children at the center of our policies, of our protocols, of our actions, of our intentions, then we make the world a safer place for everyone. Children have to be at the heart of humanity.
Katie?
And Katie,
Yeah.
want to do the last
I'll
question?
jump in on the same-sex parenting question. So in chapter 6 of Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement, we address the question of same-sex parenting for the entire chapter. And the first half is devoted to the research that has been done, largely debunking the claim that there is no difference. Now, a really easy way to understand by saying that anytime demographers, sociologists, and researchers are studying family structure, that does not have to do with studying parenting. They agree that biological parents are more invested, connected to, and invested in children, that unrelated adults always increase the risk of child abuse and neglect, and that mothers and fathers offer distinct and complementary benefits to children. So if you're studying single mother households, studying parent families, sociologists will agree on those points. But then a sociological miracle takes place when you study same-sex families. And suddenly, biology is irrelevant. Unrelated adults pose no problem. In fact, they even benefit children more than a child's own biological mother and father. And suddenly, mothers or fathers are optional. And the explanation for that is the studies that show no difference have incredibly poor methodology. For example, a study just came out a couple weeks ago. Gay fathers in Europe compared to their heterosexual counterparts, gay men that had children through surrogacy versus heterosexual parents that had children conventionally. And what they found is the children of two gay dads fared even better than children of heterosexual parents. Now, how could they come to that conclusion? Well, it is because the gold standard of social science is to have those children grow up leave the house, be able to honestly reflect on their actual experiences, find the children at random, and then survey them compared to an adequate control group. That is not how this study was conducted. They recruited the gay fathers through things like surrogacy organizations and LGBT groups. They did not examine the actual experiences of the children. They didn't ask for school records. They didn't talk to any doctors. All they did was have the gay fathers self-report. And when you read through this study, that is what you see. Gay fathers report, gay fathers report, gay fathers report. All of the children of the gay fathers were under 10 years old. Do you think that A, they included the voices of the children, and B, if the child would have the self-awareness or the boldness to say, I actually wish that I had a mother? No, you don't. So what studies like that show is not that gay parents are superior to heterosexual parents. It's that heterosexual parents are more honest about their failings than gay parents are. So we do have a few studies that do employ the gold standard when it comes to social science metrics. Large studies, children who can speak for themselves, surveying their actual results discovered at random compared to adequate control groups. And when you do that, what you find is, unsurprisingly, higher levels of harms, whether it is developmental or especially emotional. And we now do have a few data sets that are massive. That, one study by Dr. Sullins that we detail in our book in chapter 6 has probably 10 times the amount of participants that any of the no different studies combined. So when in doubt, you've got to go with the sociological consensus that biological parents advantage children in ways that unrelated adults do not, that there is no family structure where you can introduce an unrelated adults, and risks to children do not increase in terms of abuse, neglect, or even just accidental harms. And you should probably believe what we all know, and that is that mothers and fathers deserve and they have a right to both.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Rabbi Gerson. Well, we might as well end on a hot note. This has been really wonderful, really rich and deep and emotional and educational. Obviously, you both care deeply about the well-being of children. Let me give you 1 minute each to kind of, give us your takeaway, and then I have just a minute of sort of announcements to wind it up. So, Rabbi Gerson, you want to go first with a takeaway for us?
Oh boy, how do I wrap this up? This has been such a rich evening, and now I'm all wound up and I'm not going to be able to go to sleep. And it's just about midnight here in Abu Dhabi. But you've also inspired me. I have, like I said earlier, I have 70 children coming to UAE tomorrow, and I will be spending 3 days preparing them to talk about issues pertaining to safety and security and sustainability and child's well-being, looking ahead at their futures. And somebody once said to me, we talk about children and youth as the future generations. And the fact is that they are the generation of now. This is their moment. This is their time. They're not something off in the future. And they have real wants, and they have real needs, and they have real rights. And those are different things, as Katie points out quite accurately. But they do have a say. And these are the children coming here are children of faith. And they are all unified in one idea, that they're all children of the same creator. God has many addresses. It's like somebody with a lot of email, many phone numbers, speaks many languages. And according to my friend, Sheikh Lithome, having all these faiths was always God's intention, because God is so big that God can't be contained in just one tradition, which is something I really love. That this incredible tapestry of religious communities is just that. It's a tapestry all woven together. And we all hold the same things to be at the core. Children. They're the most precious people on this earth, and they are our sacred responsibility. If we don't do the hard things for them, then what about the rest? The rest is nothing. It's meaningless. We need to work together as a society to support one another and make those hard choices and put children at the center of our policies, our protocols, at the center of our communities and of our lives. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for spending this time with us. Katie, you inspire me. I look forward to learning more with you, from you. So have a wonderful day, and thank you for celebrating the 35th anniversary of the CRC with us.
Thank you, Rabbi Gerson. That was beautiful. Katie, you want to give us a
Yeah.
takeaway?
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi, especially for your heart for protection of children that are marginalized, abused, trafficked. It really is the most extreme, horrifying abuses of children that we see, and we need an army of adults rising up to protect them. I'll also say that I know that what I shared today is probably the most politically unpalatable thing that you could advance in the public. I understand that it's going to cost you socially, might cost you professionally, and it might cost you on the United Nations anytime you speak up about this. But I want to tell you, kids are worth it. Kids are worth it. And if you do not get the fundamental primary rights to life and to mother and father, I just think that we should be very clear that we are preferring our own social acceptance and personal advance at the expense of children's rights, well-being, and thriving. And we need an army of people to rise up and say, I'm going to put them before us, regardless of what it costs me, even though it's going to mean that I might not be able to get something that I want in my life, personally, politically, professionally, but kids are worth it. And there will be no, not only individual child thriving, but social thriving if we cannot put kids first. That is the choice before us. We cannot continue to elevate adult desires to the level of child's rights. We have to choose who's going to get what they want. Who's going to get what they want, or are children going to get what they need? That is before us in these fundamental questions. And I would say, if we are people that prize justice, we are going to prioritize children's rights, and we will always put them before us. Thank you so much for giving us your afternoon or your midnight, Rabbi.
Thank you so much, Katie. Boy, this has been a powerful discussion. I think we need to have you back. Yeah, I mean, just the righteousness and the clarity about putting the well-being, the needs, fundamental needs of children as loud and clear and as much as possible scientifically based is really important. And so the NGO Family Committee hopefully will become an army of people fighting for the rights of children. Just in closing, thank you. I'm really sorry that somehow the link went out wrong, but it is recorded, and you will get that in your email in a few days. Please check out our website. And one announcement is we're actually having our election for the executive members during our next meeting. Only one paid member per NGO can vote, and you can join. It's only $25. What a deal. And then you can vote. Our next meeting is Thursday, December 12th at 11:30. It's our annual hybrid family holiday traditions event, where we share about traditions from international traditions of families during holiday times. This one has food. We bring and share our holiday favorites, but you will get an email about this event. So that's December 12th. We have a program like this once a month, and please feel that you're more than welcome and sign up to join, because we love to grow. Thank you very much. Again, apologies that it was a little bit rough in the beginning, but boy, it was beautiful at the end. Thank you so much.